today we're going to talk about translations. Not translations for homework, but translations that you may have on a test. So these are some helpful tips for translating things on assessments, particularly for AP Latin. So let's take a look. Say you had a passage like the following, and on a test it says, please translate the following as literally as possible. Alright, step number 1 is do not panic. This looks like a lot of Latin words all in a row. It is a lot of Latin words all in a row. That doesn't mean you should panic about it. So don't let the panic feeling get the best of you. You know more than your panic feeling. So take a deep breath. And then let's jump right in. Step number 2, aside from not panicking and taking a deep breath, is to get your context. So let's try to find some keywords that would tell us where on earth in the story we are. We need to know where we are in the story so we can make educated guesses about vocab words, and generally get a sense as to how to even start translating this. So let's look for some keywords. One keyword that would stand out to me is Neptunus. We don't see Neptune all that often, but we have seen him in the storm sequence when he shows up all mad that the sea has been all messed up. So he feels the sea in the midst of a storm and says, hey, I didn't create this storm, who did? So then he starts yelling at the winds to yell at Aeolus. But that's really the only time we've ever seen Neptune up until this point, so that's a good keyword. Another keyword that stands out to me is Hymen. I know that Hymen is a weird word because it reminds me of the winter, and I know that it means winter, which doesn't make much sense in this context, so I know it's got to mean storm. So that's another good sign that we're probably talking about the storm sequence. Let's see. I also see caput. Caput means head. We haven't seen caput all that much, but I do know that we saw it when Aeneas was shooting the deer because they had tree-like antlers on their heads. But that doesn't match up with this Hymen and Neptunus. So thinking back as to when we saw Neptune, I remember that he poked his head out from a wave, so maybe that's what this is referring to. I also see classem, which is an okay keyword. It's not a great one. I know that it means the fleet, so we're probably on the sea. That really just helps me see again that we're talking about the ocean. And I see Caeli Ruina. I know that Caeli means the sky, and I know that Ruina means ruined or something like it. So pretty sure we're talking about the storm sequence. And I'm pretty sure we're talking about the first time we see Neptune sticking his head out from a wave. You've got that caput going on. So, figure out some keywords, get your context. Then start using some blockers. Step number 3. Number 1 is to breathe. Number 2 is to get your context with keywords. Number 3 is to start blocking things off. Blocking things off will help you see the text easier so you can know where to start. Here I know we have interia. Interia, just from vocabulary, I know is an adverb meaning meanwhile. So this is probably starting off some sort of clause, and better yet, I see que. Que, as we recall, we always translate it right before whatever it is that it's attached to, so that's a blocker right there. I see another et right here. I'm going to block that off before we get any further. Ooh, commas. Commas are great. Now the trick with commas is sometimes it's sticking things in the middle of a phrase instead of just stopping a phrase altogether, but at least I know to take whatever's in between the commas together. Got another et right there. Ooh, period. Excellent. Let's stop that. We have a comma at the end of this line, and we have your semicolon at the end of that line. So now I kind of know what to take together. The first line is going all together. The second line is split up right here and right here. I know that this et emis is going all the way down to that next blocker, even though we have this weird comma stuff in between there. I know that this is a chunk going down to unda. I know that this sentence must go together and this sentence must go together. Now we don't have 6 huge lines of Latin. We have 6 individual, smaller lines of Latin that we're all going to take at once all together. All right. Step number 1 is to breathe. Step number 2 is to look for keywords for context. Step number 3 is to split things up and break it down. Now we can start jumping into the translation itself. The first thing that you need for every sentence ever is your subject. So look for your subject. If you're not sure, because there are lots of words in here and everything kind of looks the same, trust your noun charts. That's going to be a big theme for your translations. Just trust your noun charts. Trust your endings. I know you know your noun charts because I forced you to memorize them. So trust your endings. Start at the beginning and try to find something that's nominative. Interia, it can't be nominative, it's an adverb. Magno isn't nominative, miscere isn't nominative. Murmure, I think it's supposed to be murmure, M-U-R-M-U-R-E. Regardless, not nominative. Pontum, no, it's accusative. Abyssom, no. Hynum, no. Sensit, that's a verb. Neptunus, aha. US, nominative. That's where we want to start. We want to start with our subject. And then you want to find your main verb. So the two things that are most important to get started with. We get started with our subject and with our main verb. Once you've found those, then you're in better shape. All right. So when you start to actually translate this, to put it into words, you need to go with SVO, subject, verb, object. So follow your subject and then go to your verb and then deal with everything else. So we've got interia, which is meanwhile. We can stick that wherever you want, but probably at the beginning. Meanwhile, Neptune sensed. Beautiful. That's going to get us started and get us running. After your verb, after you've done your main verb, you'll kind of know what to expect to come next. If your main verb is to be able, like poset, or poset I should say, if Neptune is able, you probably want an infinitive next. Neptune is able to do something. Or if you have an intransitive verb, like to smile, well, then you'll probably just have a correct phrase that comes next. So to smile at someone or something like that. But here we have Neptune sensed. And to sense, that should jump right out at you, is a verb of the head. He sensed that. We want to know what he sensed. He sensed that. So if we know we're jumping into some sort of clause, then it'll be easier to spot. We know that if you have a clause, right, you're looking for a subjunctive verb or for an infinitive. And scanning back, we probably want to go back now because we have this big old blocker right here. So scanning back, I don't see any subjunctive verbs, but I do see an infinitive. Scary. So that's probably going together. And if I know that I have an infinitive, there's only one type of clause that uses an infinitive instead of the subjunctive, and that would be your indirect statement. So Neptune sensed that. Now, what starts off an indirect statement? But a subject accusative. So look for your accusative. Well, here's one. That's an accusative. And here's another one. That's another accusative right there. So let's block these off. These are probably separate indirect statements because we have two different subject accusatives. Follow me? So Neptune sensed that the sea, pontum, miscere, if you notice that I trust your verb synopses as well. It's not miscere, meaning to mix. It's miscere, meaning to be mixed. Present, passive, infinitive. So Neptune sensed that the sea was mixed. Now that we've blocked it off a little bit further with these indirect statements, we can look at whatever's left. We've dealt with the pontum, we've dealt with the miscere, but we haven't dealt with the magno murmure. So trust your noun charts. Magno murmure are both ablative. Magno is an adjective, so it's got to be going with the noun buddy. Probably going with murmure. That's the only thing left in here. So have them going together. That the sea was mixed, or is being mixed, with a loud murmur. So that's kind of your first little bit. We've got our subject. We split up the sentence into chunks. We got our subject. We got our verb. We noticed that it's a verb of the head, so we looked for a subjunctive and didn't find one. But instead we found an infinitive, noting that it must be an indirect statement. That's the only one that uses infinitives. Then we found our subject accusative, because that's what must start off your indirect statement, and we took it from there. So Neptune sensed that the sea is being mixed with a large murmur. And now we have another subject accusative over here, right? We have the Hynum, which is the storm, or the winter. And he sensed that, right, to your second indirect statement, he sensed that the storm, a misam. you miss on having been sent away, and he sent that the storm having been sent away. That doesn't make any sense. You've got to have a miss on acting like a main verb, because otherwise you don't have a verb in your indirect statement. Every clause must have a verb, always. So, if you don't have a verb, there's something missing. And here we're missing the SA. So he sensed that the storm has been sent away. And that's kind of how you follow things along. Now, we could go through the entire rest of this translation, but that's something I'd like for you to try on your own. So instead, let's think about some of these hints. There are other hints to translation aside from just how to address it, and that mainly has to do with vocabulary. It can be really challenging when you don't know what a word means. And what's very tempting and very hard to combat is not letting one word throw off your entire translation. So just because you don't know what one word means does not mean that your entire translation is wrong. So let's look back at this sentence again and pretend like we don't know what one of these words means. Let's say we don't know what miscarry means. So if we don't know what miscarry means, then we can't really figure out how to deal with this part of the sentence. So there are a couple of things you can do if you don't know what a word means. The first thing you should do always is to figure out what it's doing grammatically. If you don't know what it means, that doesn't mean that you don't know that it's a present active, or it's a present passive infinitive. That miscarried ERI ending should tell you, aha, that is a present passive infinitive. So you can tell right away that it is the infinitive going in the indirect statement, even if you don't know what it means. So even if you can just get as far as saying Neptune sensed that the sea something with a great murmur, that's okay. Now we know it's an indirect statement, and we've got content as our subject accusative. That's really good. So figure out what it means grammatically, or what it's doing grammatically. Then see if there are any English derivatives that you can come up with. Miscarry. Well, if you're good with derivatives, you might catch that SC is a lot like an X. So, right? Mix. That's one way to find it. But if you're not sure, then maybe derivatives won't help you. But that's one step to take. Are there any derivatives that could help you? For example, if you didn't know what sense it meant, you could probably figure out it means sense, because that's a really close derivative. Miscarry is a little bit more complicated, but always check to see if you can come up with anything. Then, if you did or if you didn't, the next thing to do is to use context. So, there are two different ways of using context. Context can be used with the meaning of the sentence around it, right? Neptune sensed that the sea something with a great murmur. So use your context, figure it out. Neptune, what did he sense? Well, he sensed that the sea there was something involved with a huge murmur. The sea was probably upset with a huge murmur, or it was bothered, or it was moved around with a huge murmur, something like that. And you can probably come to mix combined with the English derivatives based off of that context. But there's another way to use context, and that is to fill in the blanks with any helper words you're using based off of the grammar. So if you know that your grammar, and if you know that this is a present passive infinitive, then you know that it must be translated as to be verbed, because that's how all present passive infinitives are translated. So look at your forms, right? Miscarry, to be verbed. Neptune sensed that the sea is verbed, because it's in the indirect statement, is being verbed by a huge murmur or with a huge murmur. That will give you more context, so use the grammar. This also applies for nouns. If you know, for example, if you don't know the word murmuret, but you know that mod no murmuret is ablative, well, supply your ablative helper words. Neptune sensed that the sea is being mixed with a something, with a big something. Maybe with a big wave or with a big storm, something like that. So use those helper words when you add them in to help you out. So let's review. Find keywords for context, first of all. Block sections off using punctuation or conjunctions. Find your subject and your main verb, because that is where you must start. Block off any cut phrases or subordinate clauses so you can break it down even further. And trust your noun charts.